Thank you, David. It's nice to see so many people here tonight. Because my background is not scientific, or perhaps in a way it is scientific, but I'm going to be looking at umami in a historical and cultural sense. Although the way I got into food and food history and food culture was originally through biochemistry, a long, long, long time ago. And probably at that time, and I can't remember whether we did anything about taste in biochemistry at that time, but probably at that time, if we had done anything about taste, we would have been told that there were 4 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and that was that. And yet that was after the discovery of umami and the naming of umami. As you heard in the last presentation, it was discovered in Japan in 1908, but it's taken almost a century to be acknowledged and to be recognised and accepted, particularly in the Western world. Even as late as 1985, a textbook that was a UK textbook that was written specifically for chefs and people working in the hospitality industry, people well, they called it gastronomy. It was called practical professional gastronomy, and they stated quite bluntly, only the 4 main tastes of bitter, sweet, saline and acid are markedly noticeable. So, you know, even though it had been discovered in 1908, it still hadn't hit the Western intellectual horizon. And in my presentation, I want to look at perhaps why that happened, why it took so long for people in the Western world to accept that there might be 5 tastes rather than the 4 that they'd somehow grown up with. And also to look at how Australians would have appreciated, or did appreciate, foods that were umami rich without necessarily knowing anything about umami before the time that umami had been discovered, as well as after the time umami was discovered. I think it was a bit like, I think it was the bourgeois gentilhomme, Moliere's bourgeois gentilhomme, who discovered that he was spouting prose even though he didn't know it. People were, well, like the Italians who were enjoying their parmesan. Even in the 14th century, Boccaccio talks about shaving parmesan and putting it onto a dish of tortellini. So they were appreciating the savoury taste and all the flavours, all the tastes that umami, that parmesan could contribute, including umami, as far back as the 14th century. Now, why this sort of fascination with four tastes? For a long, long time, it was assumed that there were only 4 tastes. And I think to discover why there was this fixation on 4, we have to go back to the ancient Greek world, to the beginnings of Western medicine, what was called the Hippocratic tradition, which is in the 5th century BC. The Hippocratic medicine was a very simple system of medicine, but a very practical and worthy system of medicine. You might think they didn't know a lot back there 5 centuries BC, but they had some pretty good ideas. And they thought that medicine was, the whole concept of medicine was based on the idea of balance. There had to be balance within the individual, and there had to be balance between the individual and the environment. And the way that you could, if your balance was not quite right, the way that you could get it right was to a certain extent through diet. So foods, climates, environments, all sorts of things relating to how one lived were classified in terms of these 2 pairs of qualities: hot and cold and wet and dry. And you can see in this diagram the basic precepts of the system, that there were 4 elements: earth, air, fire and water. And these elements had particular characteristics, so that air was hot and wet, fire was hot and dry. All this is quite obvious. I mean, why would you think that a fire would be anything but hot and dry? Earth was dry and cold, and water was wet and cold. Now, these are the things that you can experience, and so you very quickly can come to these conclusions. But then this was extended, these combinations of qualities were extended to apply to the seasons, so you can see that summer was hot and dry, well, we know that, and so on. And then they were further associated with fluids in the body, with humours in the body, bile, blood, black bile, and phlegm. And these were further associated with foods. I haven't listed that here, but foods were also classified, so that lettuce is the one that I remember. Lettuce and fish, because they're easy. Lettuce and fish were both cold and wet. Spices like ginger were hot and dry. So you could balance your personal qualities by adjusting your diet and putting in foods that had complementary qualities to get back that system of balance. Now this is the basic sort of concept that might have applied in the 5th century BC. It became more developed in the Roman era by the famous Roman physician Galen, and became even more developed in the medieval era by some of the Arabic and Spanish physicians. This one is a diagram based on Isidore of Seville, and it somehow links the macrocosm and the microcosm, the world, the environment, and man, with the qualities, with the pairing of the qualities. And then a further refinement of the system occurred, and in this refinement, tastes became included in the system of fours. There were 4 seasons, there were 4 humours, there were 4 qualities, there were 4 elements, there were 4 winds. Everything came in 4s. In the top, it also has the signs of the zodiac around the outside. Here in the warm and in summer anyway, you've got the flavour bitter. Now, you can't see the association between bitter and the colour yellow and summer necessarily, not as easily as you can with fish being cold and wet. But that's where it was put, and that was where it stayed. But the whole idea of tastes was fitted into this system of 4. Everything was fitted into a system of 4. If they had observed the seasons without having this basic model of 4s, they might have had 5 seasons, as the Chinese recognise 5 seasons, late summer being an additional season. The Aboriginals have a different number of seasons based on their observations of weather and warmth and rainfall and so on. There's nothing really magic in the idea of 4 seasons. And at the same time, there probably isn't anything really magic in the idea of 4 tastes, but it was so firmly held that nobody almost dared to think in the Western world that there could be anything else. Now, this was a theoretical model. How well it was used in the practical culinary sphere or in the medical sphere, I'm not quite sure. I don't think so. I think that just like they like to count angels on the tip of a pin, they like to elaborate models. And this system of 4 was reasonably flexible. You could fit almost anything into a 4-based system. And it seemed to make sense. But it didn't necessarily have any practical relevance. But that idea of 4 continued. In the 17th century, there seemed to be, in the 17th and 18th century, there seemed to be a lot more attention paid to taste. And there were more tastes that were said to be recognised.